welcome. Thank you guys for coming in after lunch to hear us chat about the media and how wearables will either kill it or make it stronger. I want to start off talking more about the role of media with wearables, because the panel title already kind of damns us for having failed at mobile and failed in all these other aspects. And I'm wondering, do you think that's true, number one, and where do we fit in this next round?
I mean, it seems difficult to have failed on a platform that's just emerging, right? I mean, that would be like having failed on the web in 1994. So I mean, right? Like, there's so much more yet to come. So no, I don't think that we failed yet, and I think that there's a lot to do. And unlike the web in 1994, for example, I think most media companies are moving into this. I get CNN alerts and New York Times alerts, and I did not put Vogue alerts on here, but I could if I wanted to, and I'm getting Zite alerts on here. So I think that,
I'm assuming every time you do this, you're
I'm doing something. Yeah, no, there's a lot of stuff that happens here, and I think media companies seem to be embracing early on. I think that's a healthy change from earlier revolutions.
But media companies embraced the web, they embraced online. Knight Ridder was one of the owners of Netscape back in the day. It's not like media companies are dumb or aren't seeing it. It's just that they're going to fail. It is never too early to announce the failure of media to catch something, ever. Because it's going to be someone else. Because it's always someone else. And it's not like media's not going to have a role. It's just going to be the same role they have online, which is the big players are not going to be the big media companies.
No, the media, I mean, we're always late adopting technology. Believe me, I've worked at every place, and we're always 2 or 3 years behind, if that. So in this case, at least it's on our radar. And I think for somebody like me or our reporters, the one thing we're going to have to learn to do is do Vine from every news event, blog about it, write about it, do some sort of sound, some sort of video on the spot. And if we have some sort of tool that makes it easier for us, so be it. Unfortunately, the problem we have is we have no budget to buy some of the actual equipment we need to use. That's always been the crux.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, and I think, look at that. I think your statement is not true. Like, the large media companies still are the large media companies, and
well, except for they're not the largest media companies online. The largest media companies online are Google and Facebook. They are not NBC. They are not CNN. They are not Time Warner. Having been an employee of AOL Time Warner and been through the largest media fiasco in the history of man, I understand that the thing is, the people in there weren't dumb. And it turns out that idea was great, this whole roll-up of media and online, but it turns out the pure play wins. And my issue is not that, it's like if you're running a big TV network, you're going to continue running a big TV network, you're not going to be in charge of search for the internet. So
you don't think that a company like NBC at all would be able to even match what Google's doing right now?
Well, again, it comes down to, Google is going to own search forever. I don't think anyone will displace them. They might not be the big wearables thing. I don't think that current ownership of a market doesn't necessarily lead you to current ownership of the next market. It's very difficult to do that. So it's not like media's not going to have a big role in it. I just don't think that they're going to be the major player, which is a different thing than saying they're not going to have a role at all.
Is that because they're not creating the actual wearable?
I think that, well, they're not creating the wearable, but the question is what wearables are going to do. Are they going to be a platform for media consumption? I'd argue that they're going to be a platform for media creation. And there are people, my guess is that the gentleman from CNN will probably talk about how CNN's done a lot of stuff in terms of media creation. They've done a great job. But that's really the issue, is where does the media creation happen and who gets to curate it?
Well, I think actually CNN would be a natural, because given the eyewitness accounts that come in from their viewers, which they've been doing for a couple of years, yeah. They might adapt. They'll adapt a hell of a lot faster than we will, honestly. I think television is conducive to that. I think print is struggling to figure out what it's going to do day to day.
And this is, iReport is the CNN product, and it was released in 2006 or something. And sure, everybody's got it on their phone, but I think the problem is you have to be like, okay, I'm in an event that's newsworthy, I better bring out my phone, I better switch to iReport, I better take a picture, and I better write something in. I think that, imagine Tahrir Square, imagine Syria, where every single one of these people has a wearable on their face and is taking video in real time. I think that changes the game for a lot of things out there.
Well, that's actually one thing we were trying to do. Actually, I've heard from our publisher about a year ago that one of the things they would love for us to do is what you guys are doing. But the problem they have is that the sheer amount of content that's coming in is like a fire hose. and where do you find all the people to filter it and parse it? So
it's kind of what's the market for wearables? There's the thing that makes the wearable, there's the actual technology, but it's the parsing and the CMS and the dynamic of how you're going to put it in front of someone. And one of the issues of media companies is they have reporters and journalists. They're the worst people in the world. Worst people in the world are journalists.
I know.
To actually get, because it turns out, because editorial is the enemy. It turns out, you know what's the biggest thing right now in terms of getting news out there? Something like Reddit, something where you don't have an editor involved.
Well, so
the problem is not that they're not situated to go and own this, like I report and having the infrastructure. It's that they don't want to produce it. That they don't want to take, they don't want to let, they're not culturally able to handle putting out raw footage from people. And you have to have the courage to say, hey man, we're going to put out a bunch of things that might not be true. Journalists really freak out about that.
That's true.
Well, yeah, I mean,
and the problem is that you actually have to give people the choice whether to believe it or not.
Well, that's the problem. We always have the process. So where I work, everything has to be fast. We need stories quickly. And the way he's talking about the process and editing, and people sit on stories going over every line. It's like, you know what? Fuck it. Start doing like 4 or 5 paragraph stories, something that's really easy and digestible. And that's actually what we're trying to do. And I think with video, you might be able to do it.
But well, let me ask here, what do you think that citizen journalism is going to become with wearables? Like, is this going to be something that media companies like VentureBeat, like USA Today, like CNN, they're going to have to put on top of all this information some sort of analysis, context, something like that? Is that where our role
We're going to have to watch what we do, because if we have like a shooting in a movie theater and somebody sends in the video, and people are going to object to that, you're going to have somebody as a traffic cop to look over.
Right. Well, like who's that editor? What is the editor?
That's part of our weakness.
But the value of media, the value of journalism, though, is providing narrative and story, and that's why it's the plus and the minus. So when you go to Reddit, you don't necessarily know what you're going to get and the value that you like. Tell me what Reddit means. The New York Times is going to tell me what that Reddit article means, or CNN's going to tell me that the importance of that Reddit article, or the person in VentureBeat is going to come in and say, hey, on this technology piece, this is what the implication of this is. That is not what you're going to get from 4,000 different watch feeds coming in. But I don't think that, on the other hand, I don't think that it's easy to take those things and make a new thing out of a CNN report or a USA Today article. I think that's, we start off as a news aggregator, and it turns out just a new form factor is to aggregate news and say, hey, our big value is going to be putting together a bunch of things that are like each other and then comment on it. The average editor would look at that and go, why is that valuable? People have to read the article. Oh, no. Commenting doesn't require reading the article. It just requires seeing the headline, turns out. Wearables, I'm sure there'll be other insights that come out in terms of making a media company that will be different than what's traditionally there.
Do you see any companies right now that are putting that sort of context on top of this big, we already have a fire hose of data that's coming at us right now from mobile. Do you see anybody who you think can make a good transition into wearables because they're already handling that in a good way?
Look at CNN. Yeah. And those guys are on top of it, right?
Yeah, I think we're going through the transition right now, right? I mean, how do you suddenly go off and convince, the guy who runs CNN, who is a great guy, a really smart guy, but a traditional media guy, and convince him that, I need to hire a team of 10 data scientists to sift through this information? That's a much different ask than saying I need 10 editors to sift through this information, which they could never do in a reasonable length of the universe.
So it's going to have to be a different focus on hiring for these companies in order to actually stay on top of all of the data. We need data scientists.
I think it's happening already. It's happening already where we work. And we have these daily meetings at noon our time. We have the top 20 editors talk about what's going into the paper. And the first thing they do is they go over the list of the 5 most popular stories online, and invariably 3 or 4 of the top 5 is video related. And they're talking about the traffic and how they can parse that and how they can push that. And one of the things they've done is they brought in younger people who are much more technically astute than what they, face it. We have a bunch of people who are 60, white, old, and kind of in the newspaper era. And they're bringing all these younger people in to teach them how to adapt. And this is just going to accelerate things. What's
the timeline of when the newspaper actually goes away?
I don't think it's going to go away.
Never?
No.
I don't know, you get a Sunday New York Times, and it's like this big giant wad of paper. It's kind of nice. I don't really want to replace that with a tablet. I mean, I've talked about killing the newspaper business for 10 years. I still like the newspaper. Jesus Christ. I mean, it's like there are parts of that.
You're not going to be sipping your tea on Sunday morning.
I mean, I think that there's the form factor. The form factor of paper is not a bad thing for certain things. I think it's a great marketing vehicle for the electronic version too. Like you have distribution.
It's the last nice iteration of whatever the story is.
Exactly.
So you have like 7 versions of a story. First what you throw out there online, then you update it constantly. Then you have the online version, the final version of the day, then you put it in print. There's always, I think that's always going to be that. And I'll tell you, it appeals also to the executives of the companies we cover. In everyone, from the smallest startup to the largest company, the one question they always ask is going to be a print version of this?
Actually, I'll say this. Everybody wants their picture in the newspaper.
Exactly.
If you ask any startup person in the world, you go, hey, if you get your picture in USA Today, does it matter? Why, yes, it does. And as long as that's true, I think there'll be a print newspaper.
Makes sense. So what opportunities do current media companies have? Because I know you feel like there's going to be it's going to be random. The guy who figures this out is going to be a new player, suddenly pops up, has the idea. I know you felt a little differently, like you have to get in early and understand the technology from that perspective. But do we have any current advantages for companies?
I mean, I think, if you look at a company like CNN, so Zite was bought by CNN about 2 years ago. And we continue to kind of run Zite as like what Zite is, which is that CNN wants some disruption internally. And I think that's why I've got a watch on, I've got my glasses on, because well, it's not even telling the right time. It's not quite connected to my phone yet. I haven't figured it out. I literally, the package came at 7:30 this morning. So, but look at, there's no reason it couldn't come from a big company. I agree with you that history is against us, but we have all the content. We've got a lot of smart people. We've got massive distribution on mobile, which I think is something that we didn't have. Like the transition from print to web, it's like people that have computers and newspapers, they don't really have a strong connection. These are intimately connected with my phone, which means that CNN is going to be showing up on these things early on, even in the earliest iterations of just notifications. The question of what next, I think, can logically be answered by us and ought to be answered by us, and I think we can do it.
I think that it's the how. I mean, Microsoft did the Xbox, right? Totally unrelated to their other business. That's really one of the coolest things going on at Microsoft. Giant business. Apple did something very outside of their comfort zone with a phone. And I remember running into the guys from Nokia when Apple first came with the phone. They were just kind of like, yeah, right. No way is this going to work. And they made it happen. It's not impossible, but I think that the biggest thing about the wearables, I think Reg, the guy who did this conference, came up with the best line I've heard about wearables, which is they bring you 10 seconds closer to the consumer. And I think that taking advantage of those things naturally, whether it's dealing with being able to handle huge amounts of feeds from people with wearables, or making a consumption form factor that works on a glass that actually makes sense. There's no reason why a big media company can't make that happen, or even a small media company make that happen. But really it's focusing on that part of it, the specifics of that interaction, that I think will make it work or not work.
So my only concern is somebody from the media is that in our haste to be the first to have a story, eventually what's going to happen is we're going to rush something out there. We're either going to get sued, we're going to be totally wrong. It's going to make a nice media column of how we mangle the story. That's always in the back of our minds. That's our biggest fear.
Because you guys, the peer action on journalism. The worst thing about journalism is peer review. You guys all pile on each other. The worst thing is to make a mistake. You know the best thing about Silicon Valley? So what?
Well, it's a risk.
Failed.
I mean, you're right. It's a risk.
This whole idea that the truth matters. Truth matters. It's like all you guys pile on each other and stuff, and it turns out, so what? Correct. No, if you print a wrong story and you correct it in 5 minutes, it's like it never occurred. And yet, journalists will never let that go. I think that if I were you, it's a branding problem. Create the brand that doesn't mean truth. Don't say USA Today. Say, Crap Incorporated, and everyone goes, I don't know what's on Crap Incorporated, but it was pretty cool. Like, stop trying to be journalists. Hey, that worked for, who owns Reddit? Last time I checked, it's Condé Nast. Condé Nast doesn't have that stuff on Vanity Fair or on the New Yorker, but they do have it on Reddit. And I think that's the way to do that, is to make sure your brand means something different. And it might be instant on from Syria, and you're going to see all sorts of horrible stuff. Mm-hmm. But it also, I don't know how to.
I do think things are kind of moving in that direction a little bit in terms of what you see in print. I mean, some of the photographs that are shown in print have kind of pushed the boundaries, and especially you mentioned some of the countries. So you see some minor steps, but as like reporters, we're living in an old era, and it's very hard to drag people away from what they're
It's a
accustomed to doing.
religion. It's your religion. Hey, it's a blasphemy to go against the truth. That's great.
Yeah.
I just think you have to be outside of that space to deal with real time.
I mean, we discuss it internally all the time. It's one of those kind of difficult situations. It's hard to reach an easy conclusion.
I just say, like, I think that we need to define what you expect or what we expect media companies to do. I would argue that this is a platform where people will consume content. It's a great notifications platform for now. It's a great platform to create some kinds of video content, especially sort of when you need your hands. I think those two things alone suggest that it should be useful to media companies. And I would suggest that most media companies that exist today will not be killed by wearables. They will likely find a way to play in this platform. Now, if you're looking for something revolutionary, if you're looking for the next Google or the Yahoo, which I would argue are tech companies, not media companies, they're not content creators. They create technologies that lead people to that content. No, you're probably not going to find it at a media company because it's out of their wheelhouse.
Well, I feel like from a technology company standpoint, because now everyone's a content creator, right? So you're going to have companies like Google and Yahoo who have an opportunity to take advantage of people they don't even have to pay, providing content for them to become a media company.
Well, I mean, the fact that we're all content creators is true, and yet, even though that's the case, people like you, thankfully, are still employed to write. The Fifth Estate still exists to give us.
There's so much pressure for us to produce that crap content too, though. Actually, I mean, it's just you can't believe it's like as soon as something happens, you're getting an instant message. Okay, put something up now. It's like, but we don't just.
I got one 10 minutes before this panel right here.
That's something I don't understand, because it really is like people do not want. I do not want to go to the New York Times and have some unsourced thing. I want the thing to be good. I actually don't necessarily need something instantly from my media company as much as there are places that I can get that. In fact, that's Twitter to some degree is my go-to platform for now. If I want to see what's happening now, and if I want to see the analysis and what's going on. Now, it should be soon, but it doesn't need to be like, you don't need the breaking story does not need to be on the top 5 media sites.
That's actually my favorite media source. Actually,
Clearly.
by far.
Twitter?
Yeah.
By far. Twitter, by far. Yeah.
Because you want the you want the place where it's
unvarnished, right.
You want the wire, and then you want the analysis. And I think that's a challenge, especially with wearables, where you're going to have someone it's like their eyeglass thing is going to come give you a live feed of a battle scene, but no context for it. And I think that is going to be a discipline issue for people who hire journalists. But that's why they have journalists.
Do you think our existing wire services are going to be absorbed into Twitter, and then those companies will have to?
Actually, so I won't say who, but somebody I know who works for one of those services is convinced they're going to end up working for Google, or Google's the company.
Well, there's two major ones, right? There's the AP and Reuters, and that's pretty much it. Reuters is basically Bloomberg. They have and Bloomberg, and those guys they have Wall Street guys who are willing to pay their stuff, and they have a wire services on the side. And there's the AP, which is owned by a bunch of newspaper companies. My guess is the AP, and the guys who run the AP are pretty smart. They've shaken down all of us web companies to get some money. The issue is that's probably not the best model for going forward. So at some point in time, something's going to have to happen.
I mean, I don't think this world is that much worse for the wear if the wire services disappear. I mean, I think that it's been the void has been filled already. It's just that this is how media evolves, and I think that's okay. I mean, the challenge for us and media companies is, I believe that information is important for a free, open, democratic society, and that's the kind of world that I want to see. So I want to preserve media in that sense, but you have to be really careful as you're seeing the progress of media, that you don't stifle the ideas which probably are going to disrupt what media looks like today. And I think it's a real challenge for us kind of in a business that still makes money.
So we were talking about this earlier briefly about how you don't think that the general wearables community will need to have kind of an understanding of this is early, this is new, let's not sue each other like left and right in the very beginning. How does that look for media companies?
Absolutely.
Especially when business models are hard to come by.
Sure, and I think that media companies, to a large extent, have missed, in the sense that they've missed the web, they haven't missed it in the sense that they don't get a lot of user web pages or tweets about them or comments on them. The problem is they don't make as much money. None of us make as much money on the web as we used to make in TV and print. And that's a problem. And I think that a part of this was because, litigiousness happened fairly early on and stifled what could happen. And people didn't imagine what the web could be early on. And I think the media companies, so this is near and dear to my heart. I mean, it was 2 weeks after Zite launched, we got a nastygram, a cease and desist from 8 major media companies. And it was Gannett, it was New York Times company, Dow Jones company. It's like, wow, this is a bunch of general counsels agreeing on language. I mean, they must have really been angry. And in the end, all the companies wanted to work with us and figure out ways to work with us, and we've inked deals with some of those companies. But why that knee-jerk reaction? Why not call us first and have a conversation and not realize that we're a small market right now? There are 2,500 people out there or something like that with Google Glass. There's no reason to be litigious on this. Let people innovate for now, and then send the lawyers in later, or send the business people in later to figure out how to make a business out of it.
I think the wearables thing, I'm not as worried about that in particular, because the problem with existing content and repurposing it is really what the media companies have their knee-jerk react to. We're a news aggregator, and we were lucky because we got in before anybody really realized what was going on. So because there's a flip point when when you aggregate content. The key is to aggregate enough of it so that people want to join you. So at some point in time, it goes from the first time you aggregate someone, they're like, "You're stealing my stuff, get out of it." Once you've aggregated everything, people are like, "I need to be in your thing," like Google. It's like getting kicked out of the index right now, not a good thing. But I think that people the wearables thing is going to be about essentially sensor data. It's going to be an exponentially larger amount of information. And so I think the real problem there is going to be parsing, and relevance is going to be more important. Usually with aggregation, you need a lot of things to aggregate to make it worthwhile. Like people who aggregate classified ads have the problem, there's 4 providers. They're not interesting to aggregate 4 things. When you aggregate everything, it's fascinating. And so if you have hundreds of thousands of people wearing, or millions of people wearing a watch that tells your heart rate, and what's the correlation between heart rate and earthquakes, or heart rate and temperature? I mean, there's all sorts of things that you can get out of that, and I believe that's the place where having a media company be able to provide a story around data. That's a fascinating thing to me that I think this needs to be explored. But I don't think I don't think the litigiousness will be as big with this one.
What do we think that's going to actually? What do we think some of these products are even going to look like? And are we worried about the filter bubble of not actually getting any new content? We're just going to narrow in on only things that we like?
No, I think this is the greatest opportunity for media companies in a long time. So Jeff Zucker often says that the goal of CNN now is to make it relevant in all parts of people's lives. We write hundreds of pieces of content a day on the website. We have 24 hours of programming that come out a day. And if you look at the history, we've got all this programming that's interesting to your life. It's like, I just went into a sandwich shop to buy a sandwich. Like, which one should I have gotten? Is there a new study about turkey that suggests that turkey breast is unhealthy for you? I don't know. But there's going to be lots of situations like this that are very real situations. What am I eating? What am I doing at the gym? What kind of clothes am I buying? That are...
That's a lot of opportunity for FUD.
I think...
eat the turkey.
Well, yeah, exactly. There's a lot of FUD, and there's a lot of annoyance too, right? I mean, I'm going to turn this off if people just start annoying me. So I think it has to be selective, but I think it does give media companies the opportunity to become relevant, not just on Sunday morning when you've got your New York Times in front of you, but all the time around you when you're engaging in things in your life. And I think that'll expand the editorial of a media company also. What else can we write about? Because we can deliver that stuff right when people want it.
It's such a rich opportunity. It's an incredible opportunity, like Mark said. I'm just thinking of different major historical events and how that might be different if we had 100 people with watches filming them in real time and going straight to the website. I mean, you just look at anything, like a plane crash or a presidential assassination, you're going to have like 25 perspectives, and the history will completely be rewritten in the way it's interpreted. I think that's actually incredible, but it's kind of overwhelming too. But you know what? Finally, though, this helps us in the news gathering side, and anything that helps in that vein, no matter what the cost technologically, it's worth it.
Amen.
No thoughts?
Again, I think these guys pegged it on that side. Although on the litigiousness, I just realized the interesting thing is that the live event thing will be something like the NFL is already be like sports is hilarious. Like they're on the cutting edge of obnoxiousness, right? Basically, they're out there going like, hey, you can't take pictures of this, you can't record this. Right. We're going to provide you can't even tweet about this. It's like that's where it will be the live event thing where you have 10,000 people watching the Super Bowl, and you know what rights does the NFL have to prevent that from? Do I have a right to film something? What happens if I go there and film it anyway? That's where this stuff becomes kind of contentious. But I do think that's the place where things are most interesting, where, you know, all of a sudden it's like the life of a city as filmed by everybody who's there. Like, will we have real-time, or the other part is like, will we have real-time video feeds of everywhere provided by everyone? Nicholas Negroponte in Wired 2 decades ago posited that there will be a video surveillance society. And there's two choices, that the government owns it or that we all own it. That's the choices. There's no other choice.
I mean, in certain cities,
and that's
already,
where it's interesting.
In certain cities, there's so many cameras everywhere that in a sense kind of is true. I mean, like London or New York. Yeah.
But who has the opportunity? So if it's the police monitoring us,
right,
or
it's
basically we all have access to everything. And I think that the wearables equipped society, enabled society, perhaps gives us an opportunity that, hey, there will be the video surveillance society, but we all get to tune in, we're all on equal footing with the guys who run the place. And that's the thing I think is also interesting. And the media companies can help with that potentially, or provide some tools to help and analyze that.
Interesting. Do we feel like these media companies, in order to actually take on huge problems like this, especially old publications, are we gonna just try and fit what we currently have onto wearables, or do we need to like start from the very bottom of our businesses and rebuild?
I think you probably, like for traditional paper, traditional, whatever media, you're going to need probably a new group of people who are early adopters who probably go in and, I don't know. I mean, you probably do need a whole new perspective and fresh take, because given the realities of where I work, and not to be too critical, is that they still think in newspaper time. You know, you do a story and you say, this happened, let's get it up on the website, let's update it as fast as possible. Well, we have to copy it at first, like, no, just put it up there now. And you know, you get, and they think it's somewhat reckless, but you know, that's the reality of the situation. I mean, if you don't do it, somebody else is going to do it, and they're going to read that publication. That's why newspapers have been dying for years. I mean, we're just slow to the draw, and we're intimidated, we're terrified of change, absolutely terrified of it.
Yeah, I think we need to embrace crazy change, because we haven't done in the past 2 revolutions. There's been somewhat for the web, hardly at all for the iPad, and I think this is hopefully going to force us. So one of the examples I love to use is, like, I've got an iPad. I can simulate a nuclear bomb on this thing. It has an amazing high definition screen. It has access to all of my social information. It's constantly connected to the internet, all these things. And yet one of the things that people show is like iBooks and the ability to like turn a page. Wow. So novels haven't progressed. Like the people who write novels haven't thought beyond that. I mean, we still write articles in several hundred to several thousand words. Surely, I think Circa is an amazing company right now, because they try to reimagine what the atomic unit of news was. They reimagined the atomic unit of news to be a fact, rather than to be an article which is a string of sentences together, some of which are facts. I think that's amazing, and look at no other media company has tried something like that.
Actually, let me just, okay, I know Anthony DeRosa and I know Matt Galligan, and you know, the problem with all this crap is it's eye candy, and this is the problem with all the stuff on the iPad. It turns out, you know what's really awesome? Text. Text is awesome. Nothing will ever be better than words. Not ever, not anything. And it turns out that's why Reddit and Twitter rock. Now it turns out still pictures are probably a close second, but still, it's like, I don't think that you're going to displace text, and I don't think that this multimedia thing, I guess there's always 2 clouds of people on the net. There's like the network people, and there's the graphics people. I just hated the graphics people. Because it turns out text matters. It turns out that the refactoring of you know, short text bursts are really critical. Circa, I think, it's pretty, but things that, it's not functional. It turns out Craigslist works. Every designer in the world comes out and spits at Craigslist. It's never changed. It's awesome. Don't change it. I don't think with wearables, it's going to be some new thing that we can't think of. I don't think it's going to be necessarily a new form factor. I think it's going to be a new uses of that data, and it's not going to be, if it's pretty, I'll just make the statement. If it's pretty and people think oh, that's so nice, it's not going to be the thing that works. The thing that works will be ugly and brutal.
Look, I agree with you that text has been and will always be king. But think of before Gutenberg. So Gutenberg essentially enabled the novel. Before that, everything was either it was still text, but either plays or poetry. Why? Poetry is a lot easier to memorize, and it was hard to write down things. And plays are easy to disseminate because I can show them in front of a bunch of people.
I agree. Well played, by the way, the whole Gutenberg argument. But okay,
yeah, I pulled a Gutenberg. But I think that this is our challenge now. It's almost like our Gutenberg challenge. Is like how do we go beyond a written story that's a couple hundred to a couple thousand words? How do we tell things in timelines? How do we allow people to zoom in and out of a story? How do we show people how that story is connected with other stories with a larger story arc? I mean, that's the challenge of media.
That leads into the question of what do we need out of this technology? Like, what do we not have to build that should already exist, be provided through the hardware makers? Or
that gets scary, right?
We're probably going to end up with bots that are going to edit, automatically all the video that comes in and then just send it out based on the criteria.
Of course, there'll be robots, but we know that. The issue is, I think the reverse chronological feed was an innovation that you didn't like. The newspaper is not a reverse chronological feed. There's that thing that the newspaper article called the reverse pyramid or whatever it is.
Inverted.
Sorry, thank you. The inverted pyramid. The Twitter and blogs introduced a new form factor for text, which had to be critical for dealing with things, which is basically a reverse chronological feed because you're getting stuff in real time. It turns out that's the right compromise. I think that will be the interesting challenge to tell the story, and I do think that the challenge for media is telling that story, but the form factor of this, it might be what's the right form factor for huge amounts of feed data. Now it might be just something that we box up with a robot, but I bet you there'll be something that comes out it will be unique. We will not understand it until we all use it for a while. It's kind of
it'll be a new form of narrative probably.
Yes,
it's always happened every 20 decades or 20 years or so. There's a new form, like the new form of journalism or whatever, blogging, etc.
Yes.
It'll change. I mean, as long as the text is important, that's all that really matters to me. That's like the last thing I've got going right now. I'm not going to shoot video. I'm not going to edit it. I don't have the capacity. I'm not an engineer. I don't have the capacity, the skill to do that. But as long as words matter, I think I'm somewhat relevant.
As long as they still have a place on these things.
Unless, well, you know what though? Actually, there have been, was it Reuters or someone experimented the idea of doing sports stories with a bot, where they would write the story based on statistics?
Max Preps would take news stories and fill them out. They'll take a bunch of sports scores and then edit it with narrative, and then Randy Oralco took second base in a blinding flash, and it was like you read it like a news story. You're like, all they did was they took stuff and they auto-magicked the editing, which was, I have to admit, you showed it to newspaper reporters and they were just they turned white. It was just like, oh, check this out. Have you seen Max Preps? And
some of the stories are actually better than what the humans wrote. Often.
Sure.
I
think it was, if you had enough data, you could do that. The problem with that business is that there's not enough underlying data to make that work for everything. If you had a canonical thing entered by people, you could then fill it out. But that's the...
All right, well, we have 1 minute left. I want each of you to tell me how we can actually make money off this thing.
I work for a newspaper, so I have no idea.
I'm with you.
I would say if you're...
Y'all make money.
Trying to make money right now is not the right question to ask. I mean, we should try to figure out what people need and deliver that, and we'll figure out money later.
How do we make money?
He's gonna have just totally pass this.
You've got 20 seconds.
Spam. How do I spam your watch? Once I figure out how to spam your watch, I'm going to make a buttload of money.
And that's our panel. Thank you very much.